There was once a girl whose voice carried like smoke on dry wind, curling into corners where secrets hid, dragging truth into light like bones unearthed from shallow graves. They say she was born beneath an eclipse, her first cry silencing the drums of her village mid-beat. Even as a child, her words rang louder than reason. She spoke what others swallowed. When the chief beat his youngest wife, she named him before the council. When the priest drank the offerings, she sang it at the river. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp and it cut. At first they called her gifted, then dangerous, then cursed. The stories spread far, of a girl who sang no lullabies, only confessions, who stared down kings and called them cowards, who turned lies into ash. It said her songs could split trees, that her truths could make grown men cry and children forget how to lie. And perhaps the most terrifying part was that she never screamed. Her truths were gentle, like a mother brushing hair, like fingers on a drum's skin, until the moment they weren't. Until a man's knees buckled under the weight of what she revealed. But then, as with all terrifying beauty, they decided she had to be silenced. Her voice became a threat too costly to bear. Some say they tore out her tongue in the night. Others say she simply stopped speaking, that she chose silence as the final, most devastating truth. Whatever happened, one day the village awoke to her silence, and the change was immediate. Lies no longer lingered like smoke, they curdled and collapsed. A child who lied about stealing fell into seizures. A woman who spread gossip about a barren neighbor coughed blood for days. Men who cheated in trade found their hands unable to grip anything for months. Now no one remembers the girl's name. No one remembers the shape of her lips or the tone of her voice. But they remember the silence. It sits like a fog over the village, thickest when a lie is spoken. Elders teach children to speak only when certain. Women leave offerings near the old fig tree where she once sat humming. Because though her voice is gone, her silence listens. It waits. And when someone lies, it answers. Ish was born during the Harmattan, when the dry winds rolled in like ancient spirits whispering old truths through the cracks in the clay walls. From the moment she began to speak, her tongue seemed to carry something older than language, something sharper than steel. As a toddler, she stared into the faces of strangers and called out things no child should know. Secrets tucked beneath turbans, shame buried under painted smiles. Mothers would hush their children when she walked past. Fathers would avert their eyes. But Ish was unbothered. She didn't understand fear, not yet. She was no older than 7 when she first questioned the village firekeeper. He had stood before the crowd, reciting verses handed down by priests for generations, words etched into memory, not meaning. Ish raised her hand like she had seen elders do during council meetings and asked, "Why do we burn grain when children are hungry?" There had been an awkward silence. Someone laughed. But she did not. "If the gods wanted smoke, why did they make mouths and bellies?" she added, her voice small but unwavering. That night, her mother warned her never to speak like that again. But Ish didn't understand why. "Should we pretend we do not see what is wrong?" she asked. Her mother, eyes filled with dread, only whispered, "We survive by silence." But Ish wasn't interested in surviving. She was interested in truth. As she grew, so did her questions. When the village priest poured goat's blood at the altar and declared the ancestors satisfied, she muttered, "That goat was sick. You chose it because it cost you nothing." When old women told tales of cursed twins and the dangers of left-handed children, she looked at them and said, "You curse what you fear. That's not wisdom. That's cowardice." When the chief's son pushed a girl behind the millet storehouse and came out laughing, Ish confronted him in the square and recited what he had whispered in the dark. By the time she was 12, she was no longer a child in their eyes. She had become something else, something feared. People said she had the eyes of a crow and the tongue of a snake. They crossed themselves when she walked by. Some whispered she was sent by dark spirits to unravel their way of life. Others said she was the spirit of a wronged ancestor, returned to balance the scales. But none dared challenge her words directly, because they were always true. Her friends dwindled. Children were warned to stay away. The few who dared speak to her in private would quickly run home afterward, cheeks pale, spooked by how she seemed to already know what they were about to say. At festivals, when others danced and sang, Ish watched quietly, her gaze steady, mouth silent until she saw something wrong. A bribe exchanged beneath a tray. A lie whispered in a prayer. A gesture from the chief's wife meant for another man. She'd call it out, not with malice but with clarity, as if revealing the truth was simply an extension of breath. One day, a respected elder called her to his hut and sat her down. "You must understand, child," he said, voice slow like honey sliding from a spoon, "truth is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a weapon. Ish blinked. Then why does everyone fear a girl who only carries words? The elder sighed, his wrinkled face folding like dry cloth. Because your words draw blood. And it was true. Her honesty didn't just cut reputations, it cut illusions. The delicate veils that held the village together, respect for elders, reverence for rituals, trust in authority, began to fray under the weight of her voice. People relied on lies like they relied on air. White lies. Protective lies. Comfortable myths. Ish, with her fearless tongue, was pulling the air from their lungs. A few brave ones tried to reason with her. They pleaded. Just be careful, they said. Not every truth needs to be said. But she didn't agree. She believed that the only way to clean a wound was to expose it to light. Lies grow in darkness, she told one of the older women. I won't let them. Some claim she was cursed. Others believe she was a prophet. The two beliefs were not far apart. What no one said aloud, but everyone felt, was that Ish was beginning to unravel something old and sacred, something they all depended on. Their rituals, their traditions, their collective silence. Even those who believed in her honesty feared what it would cost them. When the rains failed one season and the crops died, some whispered it was her fault. That the gods were angry. That she had spoken things that should never have been spoken. That her words had pierced the sky and scared away the clouds. Others defended her, claiming she had only spoken what everyone already knew in their hearts. But the fear was stronger than the truth. Fear always is. She did not stop. Not when children went hungry because elders hoarded grain. Not when the priest declared a drought caused by disrespectful women. Not when a girl died mysteriously after accusing a man of violence. She spoke. Every time. But her words, though sharp and true, began to echo back with danger. Doors closed behind her. Food was not offered. When she came to gatherings, silence fell, not respectful but fearful. She began to see it in her mother's eyes too, not pride, not concern, but dread. Her own mother had begun to believe that Ish's truth might invite ruin. Ish didn't stop because she couldn't. The truth was not a choice for her. It was breath, and to stifle it would be to die. What she didn't know, what she could never have expected, was that they were already planning to take that breath from her. That soon they would decide that silence was safer than truth. That a girl who wouldn't swallow lies would have her voice swallowed instead. And so the seed was planted. If they could not tame her, they would bury her voice. Not with dirt, but with pain. It began with whispers in the dark, warnings that slithered through the village like wind through grass. She needs to stop. Someone should speak to her. Before the ancestors curse us all. But no one approached Ish directly. They avoided her eyes, kept their heads down when she passed. The unease was thick but unspoken. As if naming it might only make it more dangerous. The first slap came from her uncle. It was midday, the sun burning like judgment overhead. Ish had stood in the square during market, pointing at a clay pot filled with watered-down honey. This is theft, she said loud enough for those around to hear. You cheat the hungry. The merchant, startled and red-faced, turned to argue, but her uncle, who had watched her defiance grow unchecked for years, stepped forward first. He struck her across the face. The slap echoed like a drumbeat. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Blood ran from the corner of her mouth, but her eyes didn't waver. Truth doesn't bruise, she whispered. That night, her mother pulled her into their hut and scrubbed the blood off her face with trembling hands. Enough, Ish, she said. You've made your point. Please stop. Her voice cracked between the words. I only say what everyone sees, Ish replied. Yes, but they need to not see. That's how we survive. But Ish could not unsee. And she refused to be silent. The second time it was a cane. The priest had just declared a goat stillborn because it had been born facing east. A bad omen, he claimed. Ish had laughed. Not a chuckle, not a snort, a clear ringing laugh that scattered the gathered villagers like startled birds. It was born facing east because that's where the sun rises, she said, her voice light, almost amused. You twist sky signs to hide your ignorance. A silence fell so heavy it seemed to thicken the air. The priest's face turned the color of drying blood. He grabbed the staff beside the altar and brought it down hard on her back, again and again. Someone gasped. No one stepped in. She screamed that time, but not in pain. In rage. Her mother sobbed quietly that night as she rubbed shea butter into the bruises on Ish's back. They will kill you, she whispered. Or worse. Ish winced but held her mother's hand. Then let them hear one last truth before they do. Punishment became a pattern after that. A child fell sick, and they blamed Ish for speaking ill of the healer's methods. A roof collapsed during the rains, and someone remembered how Ish had said it was built with lies and laziness. Every misfortune became another reason to punish her. Each time the blows came quicker, the anger more desperate. Still she spoke. Her voice became rough, hoarse from shouting truths over jeers. Her limbs bruised easily, always mottled with fresh purples and sickly yellows. Sometimes they made her kneel in the square while people threw handfuls of mud. Other times they locked her in the old granary overnight, leaving her with rats and darkness. But nothing worked. She still pointed out the teacher who beat children in secret. Still called out the widow who pocketed offerings for the dead. Still spoke aloud the names of men who thought the dark would hide their cruelty. Her courage was unshakable, and so was her defiance. The more they struck her, the more convinced she became that they feared her not for what she did, but for what she made them see. But the worst pain didn't come from beatings. It came from the shifting in her mother's eyes. Each time Ish came home limping or bloodied, her mother was there with cloth and balm, but less warmth, less hope. Her words, once sharp in defense of her daughter, became pleading. "Just pretend, Ish," she would beg. "You don't even have to believe it. Just stop saying it." "I can't pretend," Ish whispered once, tears burning down her cheeks. "My body will survive a lie. But my spirit." Her mother turned away before she could finish. They tried everything. They shamed her in public, banished her from certain gatherings, withheld food. At one point, the chief himself summoned her. He promised her land, gifts, protection, if she would keep quiet. "You are clever," he said, placing a beaded necklace in her palm. "Use that cleverness to stay alive. There is no place for fire in a thatched house." She dropped the necklace in the dust and walked away. To them, her refusal to yield became more than rebellion. It became humiliation. If a girl could not be silenced with fear, then what did that say about their power? Their gods? Their right to rule? So the rain of beatings became storms. More frequent. More vicious. But Ish would rise, always, voice raspier than before but still steady. And that terrified them most of all. The night they came for her, the moon hid behind thick clouds as if ashamed of what was about to happen. The village lay under a blanket of stillness, not peace, an expectant, trembling quiet like the moment before lightning strikes. Dogs did not bark. Owls held their breath. And in that awful silence they moved, shadows with calloused hands and eyes that dared not meet hers. Ish had barely closed her eyes when they burst into her hut. There was no warning, no shout, no ceremony. Just hands. Too many of them. One pressed over her mouth. Another tangled in her hair. Rope bit into her wrists before she could even twist away. Her mother screamed once, but it was strangled, cut short. Whether by fear or a hand to her throat, Ish never knew. She tried to fight, kicking, jerking, thrashing like a wild thing, but they were too many and they knew what they were doing. They dragged her through the dark, bare feet cutting against sharp gravel and dried thorns. Her nightdress caught on roots and tore. She saw the familiar outlines of huts pass by, neighbors, friends, people she had once trusted. Lights flickered behind thin walls, but no doors opened. No one came. They took her beyond the shrine, past the circle of fig trees that marked the edge of the sacred lands, to where the ground turned soft and wet. Mud sucked at their ankles, and somewhere nearby a hyena laughed. Then the beating began. Not like before. This was no lesson, no warning. This was punishment. Final. Fists, knees, the thick wooden shaft of a farming hoe. Each blow came with grunts, muttered curses, and breathless anger. Someone kicked her in the ribs. Someone else spat on her face. And through it all she could not speak. Her jaw had been forced open by a stick, wedged tight. Her tongue pulled forward with a grip that felt more animal than human. They did not fully cut it, but they tried. A jagged shard of bone, sharpened into a crude blade, slid across the soft flesh under her tongue. Blood filled her mouth like water from a broken pot. She choked on it, coughed, gurgled, and then mercifully passed out. When she awoke, it was morning. The sun hung low and dull like an old bruise. Her body lay half buried in mud, tossed beside a termite mound like garbage. The taste of iron filled her mouth. Her tongue throbbed with a numb, impossible pain. She tried to speak, to cry out, to scream, but no sound came. Not a word. Not a whisper. Her voice had died in the night. She blinked slowly, vision blurred, the edges of the world painted in red and brown. She tried to stand, fell, crawled, fell again. Her limbs wouldn't obey. The world tilted. A blackness hovered just behind her eyes, waiting to pull her back under. But she did not go under. Not yet. When her mother found her, she was lying like a broken doll at the edge of the path. Her skin was a mess of bruises and dried blood. Her lips had split. Her wrists were still bound. But her eyes were wide open. And burning. For days Ish did not move. She lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling, not eating, not blinking unless someone gently touched her face. The village thought she would die. Some hoped she would. But she didn't. Her wounds festered, then slowly closed. Her breath came steadier. And yet, her voice never returned. They said the gods had answered their prayers. That silence had finally been restored. They told themselves it was mercy, not murder. They pretended her muteness was justice. But even as they told each other these things, they couldn't meet her eyes. Because something had changed in her. Gone was the girl who burned with words. In her place sat something quieter and colder. Her mouth no longer moved, but her stare was louder than any accusation. When liars passed her, they flinched. When gossips whispered near her hut, they stammered and fell into silence mid-sentence. She didn't speak, but she watched. And her gaze made people feel as if she knew. Children dared each other to stand in front of her and lie. None ever did. And then it began, slow, unexplainable. A man told a lie about his neighbor's debt and woke the next morning unable to speak. A woman who falsely accused her co-wife of witchcraft began coughing up blood. The priest who had struck her stopped eating. The chief's son developed a fever that whispered truth in his sleep. No one could say for certain what had happened. They only knew that Ish was silent now. Utterly, completely silent. And her silence was not empty. It was watching. It was waiting. It had become a mirror, one that showed people the lies they tried to bury. Her voice had been taken. But something worse had been left behind. The seasons rolled forward like a slow drumbeat, steady and unchanging, but Ish no longer moved to their rhythm. She walked like mist across the village paths, silent, slow, barely there. Her body healed, though her gait was different now, uneven and cautious, as if one side of her still bore the memory of that night in the mud. Her mouth remained closed. Not pressed shut in stubborn defiance, just quiet. The silence wasn't hollow. It was full of something too dense to name. People stopped looking at her directly. They might pass her by on the way to the river, but their eyes would slide off her face like water on stone. They'd mumble greetings to no one, quicken their steps. When she passed children, they went still, stiff as goats sensing a predator. Mothers pulled them back with quiet scolds, always watching Ish from the corners of their eyes, as though her gaze alone might make their child speak some terrible truth. And yet, Ish never raised a hand. Never mouthed a word. She simply walked, sometimes sat under the old fig tree near the center of the village, where people once gathered to tell stories. Now the space was often empty. Or if others came, they sat on the far edge, pretending not to see her there like a memory they didn't want to remember. Mutes were not uncommon in the land. Some were born that way. Others lost speech to fever or trauma. They often didn't last long. They wandered off into the hills, were quietly abandoned during migration, or vanished into the forest like lost dreams. But Ish remained. No one dared drive her out. No one dared help her either. She was not ignored, she was avoided. Like a grave you didn't want to visit but couldn't forget was there. At first, they told themselves it was guilt that made them uneasy around her. That shame clung to her shadow. But guilt fades. What replaced it was something darker. The incidents began small. A boy told his mother he hadn't stolen yams, though she had seen the bite marks. That night, he awoke screaming, clutching his ears. "She's standing over me," he cried. "She's not talking, but I can hear her." His ears bled for hours. The next morning, he confessed everything without being asked. Then came the woman who lied to her sister about a debt being repaid. She crossed paths with Ish near the river and turned her head away, whispering the lie again as if to comfort herself. Minutes later, she tripped on flat ground, cracked her teeth on stone, and could no longer chew without pain. She stopped speaking for weeks. One by one the story spread. A man who lied about his harvest yield found locusts in his stores. Another who denied beating his daughter broke his hand the same night. People began to draw lines between the lies and their punishments. Between their words and Ish's silence. Children began to whisper that she had become a spirit, one who could taste falsehoods in the air. They said her silence listened deeper than any ear. That if you lied near her, something inside you would twist. Some claimed she could enter your dreams and pull your lies out like threads through the eye of a needle. Whether the stories were true didn't matter. Fear made them real. Some villagers tried to explain it away. "It's coincidence," one elder said after his cousin lost his voice mid-sentence. Guilt does strange things to the body. But even as he said it, he kept his distance from her. Never let her shadow fall across his mat. The priests, who once paraded in fine robes and commanded respect with empty rituals, grew quieter. Fewer offerings were made at the shrine. People began avoiding public declarations altogether. Ceremonies that once required oaths were shortened. Blessings became mumbled. The air grew heavy with unsaid things. Ish never asked for any of this. She never pointed. Never glared. Her presence was enough. Her silence became something greater than herself, a mirror held up to the soul of the village. It showed people what they really were, stripped of illusion. Some could bear it. Most could not. Her mother, aged more by grief than years, remained the only one who dared bring her food or brush her hair in the mornings. Even she had grown quiet. There were no more pleas, no more warnings. Just a mother's touch, gentle but sorrowful, like laying flowers on a living grave. Ish, for her part, said nothing. Her expression was unreadable. Not angry. Not sad. Simply still. As if waiting. The girl who once sang sharp truths had vanished, but in her place was something the village had never known before. A silence so dense, so complete that even the wind avoided it. And yet it remained. It watched. And it never forgot. Time did not erase Ish. If anything, it deepened her presence like a root growing beneath the surface, invisible but powerful. The village changed, houses rebuilt, children born, elders buried, but the silence she left in her wake never left. People still lowered their voices when passing her. The fig tree where she sat grew thick and wide, its roots twisting like the veins of an old god. And still she sat, day after day, never speaking, never gesturing, just watching. The fear had dulled but never disappeared. In its place grew a strange normalization, like living near a sleeping volcano and convincing yourself it was just a mountain. When the old chief died, the village held its breath. A new generation had risen, louder and more ambitious. They had been too young to remember the full weight of Ish's voice, too removed from the beatings and the terror to fear her the way their parents had. They saw her as folklore, a cautionary tale wrapped in a woman's body. Some mocked her behind closed doors. Others dismissed her entirely. Among them rose a new chief, Demba, a man with a voice like a drum and eyes always on the next coin. He was young, proud, and clever. Under his rule, the market was expanded, foreign traders were welcomed, and new rituals were invented to replace the old ones. Ceremonies filled with color, song, and speeches that painted a village reborn. But behind the smoke and music, the truth rotted. Demba promised shared grain but hoarded it. He claimed river cleanups while secretly charging tolls. He built a new shrine not to the gods but to himself, an altar of praise for a man still alive. His words were honey-coated, poured into ears eager for sweetness after years of drought. And yet, after every lie, something happened. At the first council meeting, Demba declared, "The ancestors spoke to me in dreams. They say I lead with their blessing." Before the sun set, his tongue had swollen so thick he couldn't close his mouth. The healer blamed allergies. The priest said nothing. Later, his closest advisor lied to the people, announcing a fake illness to cover up stolen medicine. That evening, the man clutched his throat at dinner and began to choke, though no food blocked his airway. He turned blue, eyes bulging. He lived barely but never spoke again. The next to fall was a merchant. He forged weight stones to cheat customers. When confronted, he lied, smiling, "This is the true measure." Within days, both his eyes burst during sleep. He awoke screaming, blind, soaked in blood. His wife left him. His sons denied him. No one visited his home. The pattern grew. A woman falsely accused her neighbor of theft. Her voice vanished the next day, replaced by an unending cough that scraped her lungs raw. A storyteller exaggerated the bravery of a warrior to earn favor. His mouth twisted into a permanent grimace, lips unable to close, words turning to mush. Lies, even small ones, began to carry consequences. Still no one made the connection. Or rather, they refused to say it aloud. Because each of these liars had passed by the fig tree before their fall. Each had, at some point, met Ish's silent gaze and offered her a nod, a greeting, a smirk, or nothing at all. And afterward they lied. And afterward they suffered. Rumors crawled through the village again like the old days. "She doesn't need to speak," someone whispered. "Her silence is alive. The ancestors gave her a new voice, and now it speaks inside your own skull when you lie." The priests held secret fasts. The council brought in a traveling seer who burned herbs around Ish's tree and cried out strange prayers. Nothing changed. The liars still fell. Some said she had made a pact with something beyond the hills. Others said her silence had grown into its own spirit, separate from her, floating like a shadow that hunted falsehoods. A few began to believe her silence was the village's last remaining guardian. Because though the liars suffered, the honest remained untouched. A farmer who admitted to underpaying his workers was forgiven, and his crops flourished. A woman who confessed jealousy toward her sister bore twins the next spring. A boy who stole, then returned the item and apologized, had a fever lifted from his brother's body. Somehow the silence seemed just. But Demba refused to believe. He mocked the fear, calling it superstition. "Do not tell me an old woman with no voice curses kings," he laughed, addressing the village beneath the great baobab. "My words are my own. The gods would strike me down if I lied." He smiled wide. And the next morning he was found in his bed, alive but silent. His tongue blackened. His eyes open wide. His throat filled with something thick and invisible. He tried to write with chalk, but the slate cracked beneath his hand. No cause. No cure. Only silence. A deep, endless, echoing silence. And in the center of the village, beneath the old fig tree, Ish remained, unmoved. Watching. The village no longer whispered Ish's name. They didn't need to. She had become a presence, unquestioned, unchallenged, like the wind or the dark. She drifted through the alleys like smoke, barefoot, wrapped in the same plain cloth she'd worn for years. Her face had aged, but not with time, more like stone shaped by silence. And though she never touched a soul, never raised a hand, people parted like water before her. It had been years since anyone had heard her voice. Not even a cough. Not a sigh. Her silence was complete, so complete, it made noise seem blasphemous in her presence. She moved through the village, past houses, past wells and drying racks, past men who had once laughed at her suffering. Past their graves. She passed them all. Corpses dotted the path of her memory. Not all at once. Not all with drama. But gradually, leaders, liars, those who twisted words like vines. They fell one by one, their ends strange, suffocating, untraceable. Some died choking. Some went mad, muttering truths to the walls. Others simply stopped speaking and withered into silence. The fig tree she sat beneath had grown thick with shadow. None dared cut its branches, though its roots cracked the earth around the village square. Then came the boy. He was young, no older than 15, eyes bright and filled with questions. He wasn't afraid like the others. Maybe because he hadn't lived through the worst of it. Maybe because no one had told him the truth. Or maybe because he was drawn to her, like a moth to the fire it doesn't yet understand. He began following her. At first from a distance, hiding behind walls, peeking from the eaves. Then more boldly. He walked a few paces behind her each morning as she moved from her hut to the fig tree, then home again at dusk. Ish never acknowledged him. Never turned. But she knew. One day as she sat beneath the tree, the boy stepped forward. "I know who you are," he said. His voice cracked, not from fear but from adolescence. "They say lies die near you. That your silence eats them." Still she did not turn. He sat across from her, careful not to let his shadow touch hers. "I don't believe it," he said finally. "I think it's just old people trying to scare us." And then, slowly he lied. "I stole nothing," he said, though his pocket bulged with a mango from the widow's tree. Ish blinked. "Nothing else." The boy grinned, triumphant. "See," he said, "nothing happens." He got up, dusted his hands, turned to go. And that's when it began. At first it was just a chill on his neck. Then a flicker at the edge of his sight. He passed by a well and paused. Something, curiosity or instinct, made him glance down at the water's surface. His reflection stared back, wide-eyed. But it wasn't mimicking him. It screamed. Its mouth stretched wide as if pulled by hooks, its face contorted with agony. The boy stumbled back, tripped, fell into the dust. His heart thundered in his chest as he looked again. Now it was gone. His face, normal again, peering up in confusion and terror. He didn't tell anyone. Not that night, not for days. But he didn't follow her again. He kept his words tight in his mouth like a secret. He stopped lying altogether. When his mother accused him of stealing yams, he admitted it. When his friend asked who broke the clay pot, he said me, even though it hadn't been. He didn't understand the rules of the curse, only that it was real. And it was watching. Others began to notice. The boy wasn't the only one. A girl confessed to hiding her sister's beads rather than dare speak a false denial. An old man, dying and confused, begged forgiveness for things no one asked him about. People began to feel the pressure of silence closing in. Not just around Ish, but everywhere. It was as if her silence had taken root beneath the soil. It was no longer confined to her body. It moved like mist, unseen but present. The fig tree's shadow stretched longer each day, even when the sun was high. Children began to say it followed them home. And still Ish never spoke. She walked her quiet path past broken homes and graves, past the temple steps and the place where she had once been dragged through the mud. Her eyes did not seek vengeance. They did not glow or burn. They only saw. Deeply. Completely. The boy, now older, still sometimes stared at her from his doorway, wondering what it meant that she had never cursed him. Wondering if it had been a warning, or a mercy. Because her silence no longer waited for lies. It found them. The silence that once hovered at the edges of the village had now settled deep into its bones. It filled the gaps between breaths, lodged itself in the walls, soaked into the very soil. The air hung thick and heavy as if holding its breath. Crops withered in the fields, even as the skies remained generous with rain. The ground simply refused to yield. Animals bore stillborns. Clay cracked mid-fire. Babies cried without sound and mothers wept for reasons they could not name. And no one dared lie anymore. But even the truth now was dangerous. The new leaders, those who had stepped into the shoes of the dead and the silenced, came with guarded tongues. They spoke only in murmurs, rehearsed and riddled with uncertainty. And yet they too began to fall. Not all in body but in spirit. Their minds frayed at the edges. They grew pale and listless, eyes darting constantly toward the fig tree, where she still sat every day like a shadow pinned to the earth. It was no longer just her silence they feared, but the silence inside themselves. The priests fared no better. Their chants became breathless. The old songs were forgotten. The shrine, once filled with offerings and incense, now stood neglected. No one dared lead ceremonies anymore. Some whispered that the gods themselves had stopped listening, their ears blistered by centuries of flattery and falsehood. The people were left to drift, untethered. Even nature seemed to turn away. Green leaves curled into blackness. Rivers refused to rise. Fires died without fuel. The wind stopped carrying music. A sense of suffocation spread, not physical but spiritual. Something vital had been blocked, cut off, as if the truth itself had damned the world. It was in this bleakness, this quiet rot, that desperation finally overwhelmed pride. One morning just before dawn, a slow gathering formed beneath the fig tree. The villagers came barefoot, with ash on their heads and water vessels left overturned at their doorways as a sign of mourning. Old men with shaking limbs. Young women with dried milk on their breasts. Children too afraid to cry. They came in silence. Not the heavy silence of shame, nor the reverent silence of awe. It was the silence of pleading. Ish sat where she always had, legs crossed, hands resting in her lap. Her face was calm. Not cruel, not vengeful, just still. Her eyes scanned the crowd as if measuring them by the weight they carried. A child stepped forward first. A girl no more than 6, clutching a carved wooden doll. She whispered, "Please, speak. Just one word." Behind her, a chorus of voices began to rise, not in anger but in aching supplication. "We were wrong. We didn't know. We need you. Say something. Anything." A man fell to his knees. The new councilwoman tore her fine cloth, hands trembling. An old priest sobbed into the hem of his robe. "You were the last truth we ever heard," he said. "And now that you're silent, nothing can grow." But Ish did not speak. She looked at them all, her face unreadable. The pain etched into her body, the memories they had buried now echoed in their eyes. It was clear they wanted to repent. To be forgiven. To be saved. But repentance was not something she could grant. Not like that. Not with a word. Still they pleaded. A woman clasped her hands together. "Even if you curse us," she said, "let it be through your voice. Let us hear something real again." A child echoed, "Even if you scream." But Ish remained unmoved. Her lips did not twitch. Her throat did not stir. The wind rustled the fig tree above her, but not a sound passed from her mouth. It was then they realized, they had not come to offer her anything. They had come to take again. To beg her to fix what they broke. To release them from the silence that had grown inside themselves like thorns. They wanted her voice back because it would mean they could stop carrying truth. And she knew it. She stood slowly and the crowd fell to its knees as one, thinking, hoping she would finally speak. But instead she raised one hand and pointed outward, not at them but at the world. As if to say, the silence is no longer mine. And it was true. It had passed into the land, into the sky, into the veins of every person who had heard a lie and let it live. Into every throat that had chosen comfort over honesty. They could not escape it now. Because the silence was not just punishment, it was reflection. And reflections she had learned never lie. The village held its breath like a body submerged too long. After that final gathering beneath the fig tree, no one spoke of asking Ish to speak again. Not because they had given up hope, but because they had come too close to something sacred, and sacred things are better feared than touched. The air changed in subtle ways. People walked softer, talked slower. Their eyes stayed low, their words clipped and cautious, as if every sentence needed to be filtered, strained, and measured before leaving the tongue. But even in silence, truth trembled just beneath the surface. And one man could no longer hold it back. He was the oldest among them, Elder Jamwa, who had once presided over councils with fire in his voice, who had been among the first to call Ish dangerous, who had nodded quietly when they dragged her into the night. Now his hands shook when lifting a calabash. His eyes were dim not just with age but with something else, guilt grown heavy enough to bend his spine. He hadn't spoken in weeks. But that evening, as the sun bled across the sky and the fig tree's shadow stretched long across the village square, Jamwa rose slowly from his mat and walked into the center of the clearing. People noticed. A few followed, then more. They gathered not because they expected a speech, but because they sensed something final in the way he moved. The hush that fell over them was thick, almost reverent. Ish was already there. Sitting as she always had, still as stone, her silence pressing gently on every heartbeat. Elder Jamwa stepped forward, his bones creaking under the weight of what he carried. He did not kneel. He did not bow. He simply stood, and when he opened his mouth, his voice cracked like old leather. "We did this," he said. "No one moved. We broke her. We beat her into silence. Not because she lied, but because she made us see what we truly were." A shudder rippled through the crowd like wind across dry grass. Jamwa did not stop. She was a child. And we were cowards. We struck her down because her truth made our lies rot in our mouths. And now everything rots. Tears rolled freely down his face. He did not wipe them away. She was not cursed. We are. And then he turned toward Ish, trembling, breath shallow. "If there is anything left in this world that still listens, let it know that I am sorry. Truly." Ish did not speak. She did not rise. But her eyes met his, and she nodded. It was barely perceptible. A small tilt of the chin. A whisper of movement. But everyone saw it. And something shifted. That night, Elder Jamwa passed in his sleep. Not in agony. Not with eyes bulging or tongue swollen. He died with a quiet breath, a peaceful stillness. A faint smile rested on his lips. The village knew then without a doubt, the silence did not punish truth. The curse, or blessing, or spirit, or force that lingered, did not seek vengeance. It sought balance. Where truth was spoken, it passed gently. Where lies were birthed, it struck like thunder. Word spread quickly, though no one dared say it loudly. Truth frees. Lies kill. The phrases were murmured like prayers, carved into doorposts, whispered to crying children. A new rule had emerged, not a law written or decreed but one etched into every tongue. Speak only what is real or speak not at all. People began to confess, not publicly, not with fanfare, but quietly. To each other. To themselves. To the dead. A woman approached the grave of her sister and admitted, "You were right. I was jealous. I lied." Her fever broke that night. A hunter, racked by guilt, confessed to killing a man's goat and blaming spirits. His limp vanished the next morning. The village shifted from fear to reverence. Not for gods. Not for leaders. For truth. And at the center of it all, was Ish. She no longer needed words. Her silence had become a mouth full of shadows, swallowing lies before they could root. Her presence was not just a memory, it was a law. Children grew up learning her story, but they didn't call it history. They called it warning. And promise. She became legend, not as the girl who lost her voice, but as the woman who turned silence into justice. Some say that if you pass beneath the fig tree and speak something false, you will feel her eyes behind your own. That your throat will tighten, your skin will hum, and your truth will spill whether you want it to or not. Others say she is no longer just one person. That Ish's silence now lives in others, in quiet girls with steady gazes, in boys who question elders, in anyone who chooses truth over comfort. They beat her into silence. But her silence outlived every lie they ever told. At the far end of the village, where the fig tree's roots coil deep into earth scarred by memory, there now stands a shrine, not built by decree or priestly hand but grown from need. It rose slowly, piece by piece, day by day, as if the very land remembered the girl who once sat beneath that tree and decided on its own to mark her place. The villagers did not plan it. They simply began leaving things. A bowl of clean water. A smooth stone with a carved truth. A braid of dried herbs wrapped in quiet prayers. And when the wind didn't stir them and no harm came, others followed. Eventually, someone laid down the first slab of clay. It cracked but did not crumble. So they brought more. Brick after brick, offerings became walls, then an open roof, and finally a doorway that faced the rising sun. No idols inside. No drums, no chants. Just silence, and the memory of a voice so true that the world had tried to kill it. They called it the Silent Shrine. Children are told never to run there, never to shout or laugh or lie even in play. Some say that if you do, your ears will ring for days. Others say nothing at all because they know better. Inside the shrine there is only one thing. A circle of polished stone in the center of the floor, with a single word carved into its middle. No title. No praise. Just her name, etched so finely into the surface that when the morning sun hits it, it seems to hum. The mothers tell the tale now, though it is passed from mouth to mouth with careful lips. No part is skipped, no part softened. Not the beatings. Not the blood. Not the broken tongue. Children sit in a hush when they hear it, fingers curled tight around their knees, the firelight flickering like the pulse of truth on their faces. She was no queen, they say. No goddess. Just a girl with eyes like clear water, who saw what others refused to see, and paid the price. Some children ask, why didn't she run away? And the answer always is this, because the lies were here. And someone had to stay. Every season, the village holds a day of silence. Not a festival, not a rite. Just stillness. No music. No trade. No speech. Families gather in their homes, eyes closed, hands resting gently on chests as they breathe together. At the shrine, people come one by one, barefoot and humbled, to sit in the stillness and listen, not with ears but with the part of themselves that lies behind the heart. The place where truth waits. Even the elders bow there. Even the children grow quiet when they approach. Ish herself is long gone. No one saw her leave if she did. Some believe she walked into the forest and let the trees keep her. Others believe she simply became the silence itself, no longer flesh but breath. A few say she still walks among them, her silence passed into others. Any girl who watches too closely. Any boy who refuses to look away from wrong. No grave marks her resting place. No bones were ever found. But in dreams she returns. People see her standing beneath the fig tree, eyes steady, lips unmoving. In the dream they try to speak, to ask her questions, to beg her forgiveness, but their mouths will not open. Instead they feel their own truths rising inside them, desperate and sharp. Some awaken sobbing. Some awaken changed. The world outside the village hears whispers of her too. Travelers speak of the place where words must be weighed like gold. Where merchants speak plainly or not at all. Where justice does not come from laws but from quiet. Curious people arrive from distant towns, expecting miracles, expecting drama. They find none. Only a village where everyone looks you in the eye when they speak. Where children hesitate before answering a question. Where the fig tree shades a shrine that asks nothing and offers no blessing, only the chance to sit and feel what truth feels like when nothing else makes noise. Those who lie find their tongues taste bitter for days. Those who speak truth return lighter than when they came. A few try to disprove the legend. They step into the shrine and say something false. Bold things. Cruel things. They emerge pale, shaking, and never explain what they saw reflected in that silent stone. The legend grows. But the village does not. They do not build new markets or widen the roads. They do not seek wealth or claim to be wise. What they have now is enough. Crops grow again. Waters rise at the proper seasons. People are not perfect, but they are honest or quiet. And both are respected. It is said that the gods now walk softly there. Not in fear but in reverence. And the shrine remains untouched by weather or war, immune to time. Not because of magic but because everyone agrees, some truths should not be rewritten. And so she lives, not in words, but in the hush that follows every lie swallowed, every truth finally spoken. Her name Ish means truth, some say. Others claim it means dawn. But the ones who knew her best say it means something even simpler. The silence that came after and made the world honest.